Well, this was not what I was expecting coming off the high that was the original Dino Crisis. For the record, I went completely blind into this one. Like, I don't think I ever saw gameplay of this game prior to playing it. I was not at all ready for the roller coaster of emotions I was about to feel. For those of you who have played Dino Crisis 2, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And for those who haven't, let me explain how one of the most hardcore survival horror games hit the fattest handbrake turn and made a complete 180 for what seems to be the most drastic shift in tone I've ever seen in a sequel.
Yeah!
Just a reminder for any returning viewers or new faces, this video series will cover all the classics I missed in the past 30 years. In these videos, I try to open up a discussion of the things that these games did well or not so well in some cases. So if that at all interests you, you know what to do, and let's get back to it. In the last episode of cleaning up my catalogue, we braved the many horrors of Ibis Island, those horrors being bloodthirsty dinosaurs in the world of Dino Crisis. By the end of the video, I concluded that it was the most butt-clenching survival horror I've ever played, claiming it to be more brutal than the original Resident Evil, and in my opinion, almost as good as it as well. I also mentioned how excited I was to play the follow-up of this near masterpiece, so imagine my surprise when I booted up what I can only describe as a haymaker to the chin. The first sign I noticed was that my shotgun, I repeat my shotgun, had 100 shells in the chamber at the start. Now this raised a ton of questions like how do you load 100 shells into a shotgun and why do I have 100 shells? In the last game I was grateful to have 3 shotgun rounds and that to me was a soft cushion. I felt safe with 3 rounds. But here I was with enough ammunition to complete the first game, given to me from the get-go. It is at this point when I knew something was up, and not a moment later my suspicions were confirmed when I was surrounded by 3 velociraptors as a first encounter. Usually this spelled death in the original, but here would seem to be commonplace. Then came the combo counter, and I won't lie to you guys, I was ready to pack it in. One thing I hate in games is a combo counter. The reason is a bit stupid, borderline irrational to be honest. You see, I like to take things at my own pace, and a combo counter places a performative and time pressure on me that I really don't appreciate. Screwing up a combo just makes me feel like crap, to put it bluntly, when a game, in my opinion, is meant to make you feel good through its gameplay. Anyway, getting back to Dino Crisis, seeing this combo meter pop up was almost the final nail in the coffin, but I pushed on. After 17 velociraptors, yes I do mean 17, I had finally crossed the first room and was greeted with a performance overview that awarded me with a total of 2,530 points. As for what these points were, I had no idea, but I remember giving considerable consideration to whether I should bother going forward with this game. I can't tell you just how disappointed I was at this point. The game that I discovered only a month ago and hailed as one of the survival horror greats has been given the Hollywood action movie treatment. More explosions, more dinosaurs, more guns, more on-rail segments, more bros.
Whoa! Let the men handle this. Let's go, bro.
It turned into a full-on action game, dropping both the survival and horror aspect. The game I fell in love with was unrecognizable. But like all new experiences, I always try to give them a fair shake. And you know what? It wasn't that bad. Dare I say I enjoyed it? I don't know about that. But what I do know is that once I was able to mentally separate these two games and thought of Dino Crisis 2 as its own unique offering, it became easier to accept it for what it is. And that is an action-heavy game that feels more at home in an arcade cabinet than it does a home console. By now you might presume that I despise the sequel. And while that might be partially true, I would argue it's more of a feeling of disappointment than it is hatred. For the record, I found it to be quite enjoyable for a number of reasons. and in some cases, I think the sequel does some things better than the original. Usually in these videos, I open up with the positive, but for this one, let's get the negative out the way first. Starting with, quite obviously, the horror and survival aspect. That is to say, the complete omission of horror, panic, difficulty, tension, and suspense. Basically, all the things that made the original the survival horror masterpiece that it is. The game essentially flips the player to enemy dynamic on its head. In the original, you were hunted by ferocious dinosaurs. In this game, you are the hunter, and the dinosaurs are just fodder for your seemingly bottomless well of firepower. Dino Crisis 2 is void of all horror elements and instead empowers the player to such a great extent that you almost feel sorry for any dinosaurs caught in your destructive wake. Lastly, the puzzles, or once again, the lack thereof. They seem to have dropped any puzzles that might hinder momentum. This game does not want you to slow down at any point. It does not want you to think, it simply asks you to point your gun at anything that moves and shoot it in the face. The only puzzle that seems to hold true to the original is this one here where you have to block the vents so you can funnel this little dinosaur into a little cage. Other than that, the puzzles seem to be more action based. Like this one where switches will malfunction and you have to strike them with your energy blade. This was a huge disappointment for me, because the puzzles in the original were genuinely fun and satisfying to solve, and in my opinion struck a great balance of difficulty without being too annoying.
Main power reactivation restored.
Alright, with that out of the way, let's discuss some of the better aspects of this game. Starting with the dual protagonists. This time around, you take control of Dylan, a Special Forces operative, in addition to Regina. Unfortunately, they play almost exactly the same, with the only exception being that their tools allow them access to separate routes of the level. But the duo dynamic also allowed for some fun segments, where they relied on each other to make it through. Next up, the dinosaurs themselves. Although they may have lost their bite and intimidating presence, there sure are a lot more of them this time around. Whereas the original only had a handful of enemy types, the sequel went above and beyond, doing well to include new enemy types at regular intervals to keep things fresh. Though it would have been cool to see what these dinos were capable of, had they been given the survival horror treatment. Alas, enemy types are near negligible when they all go down so easily. Still, I appreciate all the new dinosaurs in the sequel, but you can't throw in a bunch of new enemies without including a few new tools of destruction. Once again, the sequel takes the handful of weapons from the original and expands greatly on them, going from just 3 to over a dozen new weapons and sub-weapons, complete with the option to upgrade the ammo capacity depending on how much points you're willing to spare. There's also a handful of upgrades available for your character, ranging from a longer multiplier to armor that negates the dreaded bleeding effect. These are a great inclusion that conveys a rewarding feeling of progression. Another great inclusion with the sub-weapons. These allow you to execute a counter-attack with a quick swing of your blade, and at later points unleash a devastating firewall or even a straight line explosion capable of flipping your enemy's belly up. These added an extra layer of strategy rather than simply relying on positioning. And finally, the sequel takes you to more diverse and interesting locations. From jungle raptor hunting grounds to slow underwater treks to devastated city streets. There's a lot more to see here than at the sterile lab interiors of the original. I also love the fact that throughout the story you have to travel between islands at different points in order to progress. I just wish there were more locations to visit with optional side missions and bosses, but I guess that would have been a bit much to ask for a game that came out a quarter of a century ago. Dino Crisis 2 was one hell of a roller coaster, going from a disappointing follow-up to almost a guilty pleasure of mine. Yeah, it's way easier, way more arcade and even more cornier, but that's all part of the charm. And if you can separate this game from the original and think of it as its own unique offering, then you'll find a fun action romp that never lets up for a short, sweet and chaotic 6 hours. Once again, we've reached another episode of cleaning up my catalog, and once again I feel excited to play Dino Crisis 3. Like I mentioned, I haven't seen anything from part 3 yet, and given the dramatic shift from the original to the sequel, I'm excited to see what part 3 holds. The only thing I do know is that there's no Dino Crisis 4, and I have a sneaking suspicion that it's because of Dino Crisis 3. So if you'd like to see that video, you know what to do. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.